bountiful harvests we made this month, a tour of our California garden, some interesting things to do, review of some cool gardening products, all this and a lot more in today's episode of California Gardening. So let's begin with all the harvests we made this month, beginning with beans. Now we had our beans growing on the trellis between the raised beds, and you can see here that in November the beans have slowed down considerably, and that's because it's quite cold now here in November and the beans are slowing down. These are the final few beans we will be harvesting from this plant. And once you harvest all the beans in November, I usually take down the plant because it grows very slowly, the leaves start getting brown and the plant begins to die off. So it's best to harvest all your beans and then remove the plants in November. Now you can see that the beans are still quite good. Even in November, we got a good harvest, and you can save some of these beans for seeds for the next growing season. Now we also had pole beans growing in containers. You can see here the pole beans in containers are also growing well. The plant has produced a lot of beans, but the leaves are now becoming brown, they're dying. So it's time to harvest the beans and then remove this plant. But whether you're growing pole beans in the raised bed or in containers, you can get a really good harvest of pole beans. It's a vigorous growing plant. It uses vertical space to grow, and it's one of the best bean types that you can grow in your home garden. And if you're short on space, you can still grow bush beans. I like to grow pole beans just because you can harvest a whole lot more beans from pole beans. And it's easy to set up a trellis like this when you're growing beans in containers. And remember that beans does not grow well in the winter season. It can grow up to fall, which is around November in our area. So spring and fall are the best times to grow beans. But once the cooler weather sets in, the bean plants will suffer. You can look at our harvest of beans here, fresh beans right from our garden. Moving on to eggplants. We had our Indian small variety of eggplant growing in the raised bed, and you can see here the eggplants look pretty good. And once again, the eggplants are slowing down now. November is the season where the eggplants will start slowing down. So it's time to harvest these eggplants and then remove the plants. You can see here this is the medium Indian eggplant, and our harvest here looks beautiful. We also had our Aswad eggplant. We got a final few harvests from these eggplants as well. And November is the time when the eggplants will slow down considerably as well. Eggplants being a summer crop, they will need to be replanted next year. And you can see one more eggplant here. This one is on the ground, and a few more. But all in all, this was our final eggplant harvest for the season. This early long eggplant as well. But overall, this was a great season for growing eggplants. Moving on to hyacinth beans. We had our hyacinth bean plant growing in the ground, and the plant had become quite big. You can look at how many beans this plant has produced. The plant had grown very tall, and we also had a problem with the Santa Ana winds this month. So after harvesting all these beans, I did trim the plant down to about 3 feet in height, and you can see how many bunches of hyacinth beans this plant produces. It's quite amazing how many beans this plant produces when it's grown in the ground. Now this plant can be grown in a container. It does produce a lot of beans in containers as well. But look at our huge harvest here of hyacinth beans. They are quite nice. Moving on to ivy gourds. Our ivy gourd plant was growing in the container, and the container was quite big. The trellis was strong enough to support all these ivy gourds that were growing. And this is the long variety of the ivy gourd. Now ivy gourds will also slow down in November, so we harvested the final few ivy gourds. You can look at our harvest here. This will be the last harvest of the season. Limes. We are growing the Bears or the Persian lime, which is one of my favorite lime varieties. And the reason I like this lime variety is because it is seedless, it has a very nice tart flavor, and is just an excellent variety to grow. This is a semi-dwarf plant, but you can see how loaded it is with limes, which turn a little yellow when they ripen, and that's when you can harvest them. I really like the flavor of these limes. compared to any other limes I've tasted. These are really good looking limes, as you can see. Moving on to Moringa, also called as drumstick. Now the Moringa pods, which are also called drumsticks, is what we harvested this month. You can see how many pods are growing here in this plant. These are beautiful looking pods, very nutritious and very delicious. Okra. Once again, a crop that is slowing down now due to the winter season. The okra plant did produce a few times in November and we got a good harvest. You can look at these okras here. These are the Nombo giant okras. We also had some emerald okras. They were all growing very well in November, but slowing down a lot because okras are a summer crop. You can look at our harvest here. Beautiful looking okras, probably the last of the season. Peppers. You can see the Santaka chili peppers that are growing here. They produced one last burst of peppers before the cooler weather set in. You can see that the chilies are also not very well formed, and this is because of the cooler weather. Chilies grow very well in the hotter weather, the summer weather, but since it's quite cold now, the chilies have started slowing down. We did, however, get a lot of chilies from this plant this month, just because this is such a prolific plant. And the plant will now slow down. We will decide whether to overwinter this plant or just remove it. We'll see how it goes. But I have overwintered peppers successfully in the past, so it may be something that I will try out this season. But the Santaka chili peppers are quite good. As you can see, they produce a lot of peppers, hot peppers that can easily be grown in containers. And you can look at our harvest here. These are good looking peppers, not very prolific, but still okay for November. Ridge gourds. The star of our garden for the past 2 months. This month was quite slow though for ridge gourds. This was a final harvest before we removed the entire plant. Tomatoes. Once again a summer crop, but does produce in November. These are Roma tomatoes. As you can see that the tomatoes have ripened as well on the vine, which means that there were a few warmer days in November. But overall November was quite a cold month. You can see these are the final few tomatoes before the plant is turning quite brown and almost about to die for this season. You can see here beautiful looking tomatoes right from our home garden. And now let's take a tour of the garden. We had a very rainy November. You can see we got a lot of rain, which was good for our plants. It does help when we get a little bit of rain here in Southern California. So let's look at our raised beds first. In our first raised bed, we have our sweet potato plants that are almost ready for harvest. We will be harvesting them very soon. We planted some spinach. You can see bunches of spinach and some beets, as well as some cruciferous vegetables like cauliflower and cabbage here. You can see the sweet potato vines on the trellis. I just put them on the trellis so that they can grow there. And on the next raised bed, we just prepared the raised bed, and you can see all the details in the upcoming to-do section of our video, where we have shown you how we prepared this raised bed. And this will cure for 2 weeks before we start planting. In our next raised bed, we have all our cruciferous vegetables again, all the brassicas. Let's take a peek inside and see what we have here. We have kohlrabis that have grown quite big since last month. A lot of kohlrabis here. Plus we have cabbages, cauliflower, broccoli, all the brassicas in this bed. Moving on to the next raised bed, we have a lot of spinach that we planted. Now we had a lot of Santa Ana winds as well this month. So you can see some of the plants are a little shaken up. We also have our red leaf mustard, one of our favorites to grow. They're growing quite well in this raised bed. We also have a lot of cabbages and cauliflowers here, all looking good. You can notice some insect damage on these cabbages because they are not protected. Unlike the previous raised bed where we had a net cover to protect the cabbages, And on our last raised bed, we have taro plants. These will produce taro roots in about 6 to 8 months. We have our radishes, as you can see here, Korean radishes, now beginning to show up. We have carrots, looking good now. Another row of radish. Well, we have beets in between too. There's a row of beets which did not germinate that well. More carrots, more beets, and more radish on this bed. And we have a couple of plants on the side as well. Our ivy gourd plant has now slowed down quite a lot. We will be removing it by around December or January. And that completes the tour of our raised beds. In the containers, in our first container, we have our 4-in-1 apple tree with a lot of flowers around it. We have our firecracker plant that is now slowing down in the winter season. The broccoli plant is quite slow, but it's still growing. We have our overwintered black moon eggplant that's still looking good, surprisingly. We have our tomatoes. These are the Indian heirloom tomatoes. They are producing tomatoes still, so we kept this plant as is. Our mint plant is growing well too. You can see here lush green leaves. Followed by our Santaka chili plant. These chilies have been harvested. We'll see how this plant survives through the winter. We have our holy basil plant. Followed by our turmeric plant. You can see the winter has done quite a lot of damage to the turmeric, unlike the galangal plant, which is still green and looking nice. On the other side, we have our longevity spinach plant, followed by some kohlrabi that we just sowed. It's looking pretty good. We have our ivy gourd plant that is yellow and now slowing down for the winter season. Followed by our early long eggplant. The plant was still looking good, so we kept it. Not sure how longer this is going to grow. We have some broccoli plants protected by this net cover or this mesh cover. And I'll provide links to these products in the video description and comments. We have some cilantro in the next container and one broccoli plant that's growing alongside. We just sowed some carrot seeds. These are the atomic red carrot seeds. Followed by some Korean radish that's now well protected inside this net cover or the mesh cover. We also just sowed some carrots here. These are the Burpee A1 carrots. You can see the birds are digging up the soil in search for grubs. They love doing that for some reason. It could be the rats as well. We have our Egyptian walking onions. You can see a couple of onions on the top here. Followed by some more radish. This is the Minoways radish. Once again, very well protected. We have our early broccoli plants that are growing well in this container. We did give it some support due to the heavy winds we had. We have cauliflower in this container. Followed by some spinach plants that we planted. They're looking okay, not great. Hopefully they'll spring back into life again. We sowed some fenugreek seeds in the next container. You can see that they are germinating now, looking good. You can still see something has dug up the soil here on the surface. Right there. You can see there are some damaged plants. So we'll have to protect this container as well. We have our ivy gourd plant. This is a long ivy gourd plant. You can see that it has slowed down quite a lot. Followed by our mint plant, which is looking good. We have our turmeric that is now almost brown and about to die. We will harvest this by December or January. We have our potato onions that are growing well. Followed by our Nombo giant okra, which we are planning to overwinter, but I'm not really sure if it will. Some more cilantro here in this container. Followed by our broccoli plant, which is now producing this head of broccoli. One of the first broccoli plants we planted. We have our lettuce plants. The lettuce leaves are looking good. We will be harvesting these very soon. followed by our dwarf kale plants, which are really looking good now. They suffered a lot in the summer season, but they're growing quite well now. Followed by our taro plant that is looking quite nice as well. And we are yet to prepare this container. We just removed the aswad eggplants from this container. So this has to be prepped and we will be sowing some winter vegetables here. In the GreenStalk leaf planter, we still have our strawberries growing. The strawberries are looking a little slow now because of the weather. It's quite cold here in Southern California for strawberries. In the GreenStalk Classic planter, we have our onions that are growing quite well. They have grown quite larger than the previous month and they will continue to grow for quite some time. And now let's look at the things for you to do in your garden this month, beginning with planting. We are planting our atomic red carrots here in this container. And carrots are a great crop to plant during the winter season. They grow quite well here in Southern California. And we're just going to be sprinkling our seeds here on the surface of this container. Now we don't have a lot of seeds, so hopefully we have enough seeds to cover most of the container. And this is just a mix of garden soil as well as some compost. And we are going to be topping off the seeds with some hay. The carrot seeds are quite small, so we just cover them with a light cover of hay so that they don't fly away in the wind. But that's all really you got to do is sow your carrot seeds and then cover them with a light layer of hay, which is quite enough. And just water it. This straw or hay contains a tacking agent which makes it stick to the soil. So we do get a lot of winds here. And the straw, the tacking agent in the straw helps the straw stay on the surface and not fly off during winds. We are also planting some kohlrabi in this container. And the way we are planting kohlrabi is just digging a few holes about 4 inches apart and sowing 2 seeds in each hole. And we will thin out these kohlrabis once they germinate. So you can see here the kohlrabis are quite easy to grow in containers like these. We are also sowing another variety of carrots, the Burpee A1 carrots. And if you haven't seen my video on growing the Burpee A1 carrots, please do check it out. It's a great carrot variety to grow in your home garden. And we are sowing our seeds in 2 concentric circles, as you can see here. Instead of just scattering the seeds all around the container, we are going with this approach this time of sowing the seeds in 2 circles. And then we will thin out the seeds once the seedlings emerge. Now carrots take a long time to germinate, up to 15 days in some cases. So just be patient, sow your carrot seeds, just lightly cover them with soil or straw or hay, and then wait for about 14 to 15 days. I also wanted to show you how to use compost in your home garden. And if there's one thing every gardener should do, they should be using compost. You should be composting. You should turn your kitchen scraps into compost and then use them in your home garden. This is the single best thing you can do for your home gardening. And we have this 2-chamber tumbling composter that we use. And I'll provide a link to this composter in the video description and the links below. We take our compost and then we add it onto our raised bed. You can see that we are taking our compost, we are spreading it out on the raised bed. And this compost contains a lot of beneficial bacteria, nutrients, minerals that the plants need. And here is all the compost that we collected on the tarp. And this is just 1 chamber of the tumbling composter. There are 2 chambers. And we spread out the compost evenly on the raised bed. And using some water, we clean out the sides of the raised bed first, just to make sure all the compost is in. And then we water down the compost thoroughly. You want your compost to settle down into the soil very well. I also keep an eye for plastics. Any plastic that I see in the compost, I remove it now. No matter how much you avoid plastic, there will be a lot of plastic all around you all the time. But just make sure that you look for any plastic, small pieces of plastic, and remove them from your compost. And finally, we're going to be topping this off with a layer of peat moss. Now, peat moss is good because it's very stable. Unlike compost, it doesn't decompose very quickly. It will stay for a long time. And adding this layer of peat moss will cover the compost. It will allow you to sow seeds. The seeds will germinate very well in this layer of peat moss. And overall, this is a great way to layer your bed, your raised bed. Just break up any big pieces of peat moss that you see. Because it is compressed, you might end up with some of the big pieces. So just tap them down, just break them, and then spread them out on the raised bed. So for one raised bed, about half a bag of peat moss, maybe 1/3 should be enough if you're using compressed peat moss. And then water it down again. Make sure that the peat moss is well watered. Peat moss is hydrophobic. It will resist water. But once you water it down a few days in a row, it should be okay. And you want this to cure for about 2 weeks. Within 2 weeks, you will see all the weeds that are coming out, all the seeds that will germinate. You can remove all of them. Make sure that your bed is ready for planting. And we will begin planting in this raised bed very soon. And now let's look at a gardening product that is very interesting. You can see here our containers had a lot of water collected on the bottom. And we also got a lot of rains which added to the problem. And this was a big problem because it was a breeding ground for mosquitoes. We were getting a lot of mosquitoes in our home. It also had a very foul smell due to the standing water. And it's terrible for the roots. The roots are almost inhabitable inside this layer of water at the bottom. So we had to clear off this water and we had to find a solution to this problem. Now you can also see a lot of water that's collected in this first container. You can see a lot of water here. And if you move on to the next container, there's hardly any because the plant has taken up most of the water. And then again in the third one, there's a lot of water. So this was becoming a problem because the drip emitters are set for a certain duration of time per day, but not all plants need that much of water. So it's very important that the excess water was drained. And the solution to that is to first remove the water. I'm using a blower here. This is the easiest way to remove water that's collected on the bottom of these saucers. And within just a few seconds, you can see that the water has come off. And we do that for the next container as well. And the next one, you can see how much water has collected in this container. And this also stains the pavers at the bottom. So make sure that after you blow the water off, you remove the drained water very nicely. And you may have to do this multiple times. And now this is the solution. We are using the GreenStalk Spinner. We ordered 50 of these for each of our containers in our garden. This is the spinner. You can see that the base spins. But the beauty of this base is that it not only spins, it collects all the water at the bottom. And it also has wheels. If you want, you can buy this with the wheels. And adding the wheels makes it very portable as well. You can see here after we installed the wheels, it's quite nice. And the beauty of this product is that it's not only very sturdy, but it will drain all the water at the bottom of the container through this pipe that you see here, this drain pipe, and then take it wherever you want it to go. Mostly in a planter area or a turf area or anything that's non-paved. And here you can see after we have added the GreenStalk spinners, the containers are sitting right on top of the GreenStalk spinner. You can see how clean it looks now. There's no water that's collecting at the bottom. And all the water that's draining out will drain through this pipe into the turf area. You can see a lot of these lime deposits and dirt on the bottom of the container. This is not a good sign. This will cause a lot of mold and mildew and algae and smell and aerobic bacteria. And overall it doesn't give you a good look. But after adding the GreenStalk spinner, you can see how beautiful this looks. The containers look very nice. Now this is a GreenStalk spinner that we added in the previous season. And we removed the container. You can see how much dirt has collected on the bottom, but almost nothing on the pavers, except for all the dirt that we blew around when we were cleaning the patio area. And you'll see how easy it is to clean this out for the next growing season. All we do is take a water hose and clean the bottom of the pavers. You can clean them very well. You can use a pressure washer if you wanted to, but I'm just using the garden hose and it's good enough. I think it's doing a good job of removing all the dirt from the bottom. And you can then clean the GreenStalk spinner by just using a water hose I'm just spraying out all the dirt that's collected here on the bottom of the spinner as well as on the top. And then we put our spinner back into the place it belonged. And you can see how clean the area is. And even though all this dirt and grime collected on the bottom, it was very easy to clean the container and the base and then put the container back. This prevents all these sorts of lime deposits and everything else on the container. And it's an excellent product for your home garden, which is why we bought 50 of these, yes, 50, to replace the base of every container in our home garden. And if you want to buy this product, I'll provide links in the video description and the comments below. You can go to greenstockgarden.com, use coupon code CAG to get $10 off 75 plus orders. It's a great deal. It's a great product. It's very well built, and you will get great customer service as well from GreenStalk. So there we have it, folks. That was a November episode of California Gardening. If you like this video, please give us a big thumbs up. If you have a question or comment, post them in the comments box below. We'll see you again soon. Happy gardening.